So last time we introduced functions. We talked about some very basic functions. We went over the anatomy of our function using that test example, which was for a max function, the max between two numbers. And we ended by looking at two different programs. One was print letter grade and one was return letter grade. So I'd like to start by just refreshing our memories on those two programs. Here is the print letter grade function. And I'd also like to refresh our memory on the fact that from here on out, even on the smallest of programs that we may choose to do, we want to always code using a main. So even if I said, write a program to print hello world, if you were doing this in the C language, in Java, or in many other languages, you would need to have a main function, if you will. So if this were Java, what would actually, hold on, bear with me. If this were Java, what you would have is, oh boy, public static string main, no, public static void main string args, something to this effect. That's how a function looks in Java. It's called a method, but that's how a function looks in Java. And then inside here, you would basically put print hello world. The way to print is different. It's actually system.out.print. I'm not here to teach you Java, but I'm just showing you. So other languages have a main, okay? And that's how your program starts, by starting with that main function. So similarly, as I mentioned, from here on out, we want to always be starting our programs with a main. Here we're calling our main. And then here is our main function. So even a function as small as print hello world, you should have that inside a main function. And how do we know it's inside the function? Due to the indentation. And then we need to call that function. So just reminding ourselves of some of these things we discussed last time. So here was our print letter grade function. In our main is where so in this main function is where we had the functionality of what? We prompt the user to enter a score and then scan the score and then print the results, print the result. And notice I'll even put a comment here. Here we call the print letter grade function on its own line. Can someone remind me, why did we call this on its own line? Anyone?
Wasn't it because it actually printed the answer as opposed to returning it?
Answer, correct. Answer, because this function actually, or this function simply prints the result inside the function. It didn't return anything. Okay? So, and we just called that print letter grade. So notice what we did though, I want to refresh you on this, is we scanned the score from the user right here on line 16. I then printed the letter grade is, and I put this end equals double quote so I can keep the cursor on that same line, and so I can print, if the letter grade is an A, I can print the A right on that same line, or if it's a B, I can print that B right on that same line. And then here on its own line, I call the print letter grade function. And this print letter grade function has one what? What is this thing called? Someone else other than Ibrahim, remind me, what is that called? This thing that I'm highlighting, score, what is it called here with respect to the functions?
Placeholder?
Good guess, Musab, but that's not correct. I'll say why. I'll say why I accept that answer partially, and why, because your memory is pulling at something correct. Anyone, quickly, what is this called here? Inside parentheses, when we send something to our function, what are those things called? David, you know the answer, right? Ah, I do, but my mic stopped working. Okay, so what's the answer? I'm looking at the chat. Yeah, parameters. Okay, so whatever's inside these parentheses, those are called parameters or arguments. Okay, so here, let me open back up the module 6 notes. So I didn't put many notes in here. So here, define simple print function to print hello. I'm going to say this function has zero, none, no parameters. Okay. What are parameters? They are the values, variables inside the parentheses. Okay, so this one has no parameters. Let's come back again. Well, I'm going to get to parameters. We're going to make all kinds of functions today. So here, this print letter grade function, it had one parameter. And let's come look at this function first up here, then let's see how we called it. And I'll remind you, we can put functions in our program, but they'll never get used unless we call them, right? So here's this define print letter grade function. And if I did not put line 22 here, if I commented out line 22 and I run this program, it's just going to say enter the score. Let's say I put 89, which we know is a B, and it's just going to say the grade is, and then the program ends, because you notice on this print statement, the grade is, that's all I printed, and there's no other line to execute within our main. So we have a function up here that we just simply never took advantage of. We never utilized it. But when I uncomment out line 22, now I'm saying, hey, let's go use that function above. We have this function we created. Let's go use it. So we called this print letter grade function, and we sent to it a value. So let's look at this function first. This function is called print letter grade. We've defined it. That's the DEF. The name of the function is print letter grade. And the fact, so Musab, this goes to what you mentioned. You said maybe it's called a placeholder. And we did use that word last time. So this is really called a parameter or an argument, okay? So print letter grade function, it receives one parameter, which is the user's score. This function then prints, what does it print? This function then prints the corresponding letter grade. Okay, so we received the score. Maybe the score is, as I said, an 89. So then you just look at this logic. If the score is greater or equal to 90, it's not. Else if the score is greater or equal to 80, it is. So we print a B, and you all know how an if, elif, else statement works. Once we print this B, we skip all of that. And then the function is complete, okay? So here, whatever the score is, we're then going to go run through and print the corresponding letter grade. So again, here's the call to the function. And Musab, sorry, going back to what you mentioned, you said placeholder. Yeah, because this right here is a parameter, and this right here is a parameter. Does anyone remember the two different types of parameters? They're just like, what is this exact parameter called, and what is this exact parameter called? Anyone?
The one in the actual function header is called a formal parameter, while the one in the function call is an actual parameter.
So this is the actual parameter right here on line 25, because when I send over score, what is score? Score is the value that I read from the user on line 19. Score is a variable that actually contains a number, an integer that we read from the user. So this is an actual value here. Maybe it's going to be, 73. It's an actual value. And we're sending that actual value up here as a parameter to our function. So this is a parameter as well, but Musab, what we did is we said that we refer to this, we can think of it as a placeholder, because this word score right here, this variable, it's just a word that is used to catch the value that we're throwing over to the function. So we're throwing some value to the function, and then we catch it and we store it right here within this placeholder, and this is also called a parameter. So again, this is a parameter or an argument. Okay, either one, those are synonymous, those are synonyms. And here is the parameter or argument, the actual value that we send over to the function. And then we simply print it. We also told you that some functions can return values. So here, instead of calling the function right here, instead of calling it print letter grade, we called the function now get letter grade. Okay, and so this is called get letter grade. It receives one parameter, which is the user score. The function then returns the corresponding letter grade. Okay, the function then returns the corresponding letter grade to the user. Okay, we're still just summarizing what we did last time. So here we receive the score. That's all the same. We have the same if-else statement. Okay, but what we did on this one that was different, instead of printing A, we stored A into this variable called letter grade, or we stored B into letter grade, or C, or D, or F into the variable letter grade. And then we returned letter grade, okay? So what actually happens here, as you saw, but I want to actually annotate this very briefly. As you saw perhaps last time when we did this with the debugging, which I think is quite valuable, which I won't do that again now, but I just want to remind you. So here, if the score was, let's say the score entered by the user was how about a 78? Okay, so the score was 78, hypothetically. It's way too thick. Okay, so if the score was a 78, what happens here on this print statement right here? We're printing the grade is, it's a formatted printing, so here's our placeholder. And what are we putting inside that placeholder? Well, look inside the dot format. Inside this placeholder right here, we're gonna put this. Well, what is that? Get letter grade score. What is that? That is a call to our function. So let's examine that call to the function. So right here, all of this is what's going to go inside here. So the question is, what is all of that? So this right here that we have underlined in red, that get letter grade score, is we're calling our function. And remember, we said, what if the score was 78? Okay, so we're sending over 78. So 78 would come up here for score. Okay, 78 would come right there. And then we simply check. If score is greater or equal to 90, letter grade is A. If score is greater or equal to 80, letter grade is B. Else, if score is greater or equal to 70, letter grade is C. So now this variable, letter grade, okay, it's going to be equal to C. And we don't do the rest of this part because that else if right here was correct. Okay, that's correct. So we skip this part, and then we come down to the very last statement of this get letter grade function. And that is we return letter grade. Well, what is letter grade right now? It's C. So we return that value. So remember, letter grade is a C. And this value C, where does it get returned to? The exact answer is this letter grade of a C, it gets returned to exactly the spot from where we called the function. So where did we actually call this function? We called it right here. So this letter grade of a C gets returned into that exact spot from which we called it. And so all of this becomes C, which means what goes inside this formatted printing right here? C goes inside it. C goes inside it. Okay, hopefully that's clear. Just wanted to summarize because I think functions being new, it's a lot to take in. And all you can really do at this juncture is practice them. And there's a lot of, I was looking through the notes yesterday and again today of what's left in the module, because we only introduced it, but really what's left is simply practice. And because there's a few more things to talk about. I'm not going to talk about positional keywords or arguments in Python. I don't like it. It doesn't line up with other languages as much. So I'm not going to talk about that now, just due to the time restrictions that we have. I do want to I'm not going to talk about activation records. These are all technical things that we would test you on. If you're a professional programmer or trying to be a developer and you're graduating from college or an actual boot camp, which you pay for and it costs thousands of dollars, then yeah, we would want to go through each and every little detail of this with you. But for now, the interested reader can simply go and look at these detailed notes that are within the PDFs on the website. We did mention that every single function in Python, which is unique to Python, every single function returns something. So in fact, even this function over here, so this function right here, clearly it actually has the word return and it's returning a letter grade. But even this function right here, even this function, it's actually returning something, even though we don't see it. It's actually returning none, which is just a keyword. So whether we see it or not, that's actually being returned right there. Every function returns something. So if you don't type return something, it's just the way Python was coded and developed, that it returns the keyword none. Not the biggest detail. For all intents and purposes, we can accept and understand that this function returns nothing. So the way you can understand functions is like a stack, and I think that's worth going over. So I'm not going to go over the activation record, but I want to just draw a little picture here and explain how we can understand functions. So here we have 3 functions. Okay, no, we have 2 functions. And imagine when we start executing this program, think of like a stack of cafeteria trays. So imagine I'm just going to draw a stack. Here's this stack here. Okay, and I can put one plate at the bottom of the stack, another plate at the bottom, or if you want to say cafeteria tray, and then I can put another stack, another plate on top, or another tray on top, another plate or tray, another tray, another tray. This is a stack of cafeteria trays or a stack of plates. Think of that as the same thing for your functions, that we have this stack here, and the very first function that we call goes at the bottom. So what is in this program here, what's the first function that gets called? Quickly, someone.
Main.
Main gets called. So right here, main, we're calling main. So here we define a function. Here we define a function. The first function to get called is actually main right here. So main gets called, and then main is going to come onto the stack. This is main. Okay, so, and what is this stack? This is the area where everything is stored for your function. All of the memory for your function, any variables for the function. This is where everything for that function is stored on that computer in memory. And then here we call the get letter grade function. And so that comes on the stack. So this is the get letter grade function. Okay. And then here, what is stored inside here? Everything that's needed for that function. All of the variables, all of the details for that function. And so we talked about this briefly on Tuesday, that when main calls this get letter grade function, because look, on what line of our program was this get letter grade function called? It was called on line 22, which is inside our main. But so when we call that get letter grade function here on line 22, what actually happens is our main function is put on pause. Because look, we're in the middle of a print statement. That's crazy. We're in the middle of a print statement. We literally printed the characters THE space GRAD space I is space. We printed all of that to the console, to the computer screen. And now we're trying to print what's inside that, this placeholder. And in order to print that, we call this function. So right then, main is effectively, we hit the pause button. It's paused. And we leave main and we start this new function up here. And then we perform that function. We calculate the letter grade. Let's say we determine it to be a C, as we just did in the last example. And once it's determined to be a C, that function then exits the stack. And we go back and we return to our main function. We print our C, or we put the C right here. And then notice line 22, that's the end of main, okay? And so then main is finished. So main will therefore exit the stack or pop off the stack. And now there's nothing open on the stack and the code has been completed and the entire program finishes. So it's helpful to think of these functions as a stack, like a stack of plates, a stack of trays, a stack of functions. I'm not going to go through, as I mentioned, activation records. But I would like to talk about the importance of the order of our parameters. So let's come back to our module 2 notes and actually put something in here. So this is a simple function to print hello. How about this? Let's make another function. So you know what? I'm going to put all of these at the top. What is all of this? Cool. So here, I'm going to call a function print what? Print in times that prints a given message in times. Okay, so check this out. Print in times. I'm going to call it, I'm going to put stuff in here. Put stuff here. I'm not going to put that stuff there yet. Let's go make this function above. So here, I like to put comments first. So print in times, make this a little bit bigger so y'all can, hopefully y'all can see this. You should be writing this at the same time. So this function, print in times, this function print in times, the parameters receives two parameters. A string, which is the message to print, and an integer, which is the number of times to print the message. Okay? Returns none, which is nothing. This function returns nothing. And then if you wanted to put a description, this is all comments for a function, which is how you should comment a function. Description is this function simply prints a given message sent as a parameter in times. Okay, so print in times, message, and in. So remember, we said this function, it receives two parameters. The first parameter is a string, which is a message to print. And then the second is an integer, in, which is the number of times to print that message. So for the body of the function, you can do this in just 2 lines. Using what? How would I actually code this up? So imagine that the message, just for clarity of what we're doing, I'm just going to type this up real quick and then I'll delete this. So imagine if the message was hello and in was 4. What should we get for printing? We should get hello, 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 hello. We should print that message 4 times. So someone tell me, hopefully this is easy, what do I type on line 27?
You would start a for loop.
Okay, for what?
I in range n.
For I in range n. Okay, and what do I do here inside the loop?
You're going to print your message.
Just print message. That's it.
Make sure you put I before n.
Oops, I thought I wrote that. Okay, that's all I do. For I in range n, so if n was 4, I'm basically going to loop 4 times, right? If this was 4, this would have been 4 times. And for each time, I'm going to print my message. Okay, and here, so now, so this is defining the function. And I need to actually type DEF. No one's catching these things. Okay, so I've defined my function. For I in range n, print the message. So now later in our code, let's call the function. Okay, but you know what? Let's even define one more function. Main. I'll just put description. Description. This is simply our main function where we put all code of our program. Okay, so here I have defined main, and let's put all of these things inside main now. Okay, so here, call a function print n times that prints a given message n times. So how many parameters did that print n times function have? Someone tell me, how many parameters did that print n times function have? Chloe?
Two.
Yeah, it had 2. And notice one of them was a message, and the second thing was however many times we want to print it. So I can just type here. We could ask the user to enter a string. Here, let's do this. Some message equals input. Please enter a string of text. Okay, that's our message. So we're going to send that message as a variable right here. And I want to print it a certain number of times. Let's say I want to print it 10 times. Okay, so we run out, I need to call main. So right now I just ran the program, and of course, what's happening? Let me hit stop. I run the program and nothing's happening. Why?
You never called main.
So I never actually called main, right? I can't see because my chat window's over here. Okay, what does it say? Unused variable I. That's okay. Yeah, so I never actually called my main. So here, now when we run the program, what is hello from? That was that simple message. Please enter a string of text. And then I hit enter. And then we printed that 10 times, right? Now, if we wanted to make it more clear or clearer of what we printed, I could have used formatted printing. I could have said this colon this dot format I comma message. Formatted printing makes your life so much easier once you get used to it. Enter a string of text. Python is easy. And so we printed that 10 times, starting at 0, going up to 9. So what I want to now point out with this, can Kulsum, notice your thumb is up. So I want to make sure, Kulsum, can you take your thumb down actually for just one moment? So now if everyone can put their thumb up, if you understand this example clearly, understand that 100%. Okay. So here on this example, what I want to point out is there were 2 parameters of this function. right? Those are the two parameters. You can see that they're two because they're separated by a comma. And the first is a string, the message we want to print. You can put your thumbs down. And the second parameter is an integer, the number of times we want to print it. So because this function expects two parameters, when we call this function, we have to send two parameters. So notice that the function call below must have two parameters. You know what? I'll just below is the function call, and I'll put this as a comment. Notice that the function call above must have two parameters. If I put only one parameter, let's say I put some message and I forgot to send over the 10. What's going to happen is because what Python's going to do is when you call this on line 41, you call this function, Python's going to go look, hey, do we have a function called print in times that expects only one parameter? And it's going to be like, no, I don't see that anywhere. Because remember, when I debug this, what actually happens on the debugger when we debug this? When we debug it, Python sees, okay, hey, take note, we have this. Here, let me open up. Sorry, I'm going to hit stop. I'm going to go to view variables. So again, when I debug this, Python says, hey, take note, we have this function called print simple message. Heads up, right? And so it simply takes note of that and it saves it over here, okay? Print simple message, it's a function that expects no parameters. Continue, heads up, we have this function called print in times that takes two parameters, just heads up. Hey, another heads up, we have this function called main that takes no parameters. Okay, we then call our main, okay? So what happens is when we go through this, we do our main, we do the simple message, we come here, we input some string. It's waiting for me to enter somewhere, but my code here, I need to come back over here, enter some string of text. I do that, okay? So what happens as soon as I enter that string of text, print in times some message, and we put that string of text as a parameter, Python's going to give you an error. It's going to say, excuse me, I don't see a print in times function with only one parameter, and it got an error. In fact, it recognized that, hey, you do have this print in times function, but that one that you have has two parameters, and you only called the function with one parameter. So it says missing one required argument. Remember, parameters and arguments are synonymous. So it must have two parameters or two arguments, okay? So if we only put one, it would be an error. It should be like this. Now, similarly, something else that would give you an error in many languages, as well as Python, but here it's going to be more of a logical error, is notice that there are two parameters required, and here we have two parameters, so that all looks legit. But now what if we swapped the order of those parameters? What if I said I'm going to send over 10, and then I'm going to send over some message? So for the first parameter, I'm going to put as a 10, and the second parameter, I'm going to put some message. Well, what happens here is this 10 will come get stored inside the variable message up here. And the actual message that's typed by the user will get stored inside in. So that will either fail or not fail depending on what your function does, okay? So here, when we try to run this, enter a string of text, that's gonna fail. Why? Is because we said for I in range, so let's say I put a string of text of Bob, we're basically saying for I in range Bob. That doesn't make sense, right? Because what happened is we accidentally sent Bob, which is that string of text, that some message, we sent it as the second parameter. So the point of this is you need to make sure that your parameters match up. What's the first parameter of the function? The first parameter is message, okay? So we need to make sure that we send the message first. What's the second parameter of the function? In. So we need to make sure we send over in second. Maybe I'll put 5 here, okay? And then we run it, I type in Bob, and we're good to go. So it's important to make sure that you keep the order of your functions correct. So look, let me go ahead and hit, I'll explain a problem, then we'll come back and we'll solve that, and we'll solve some more in the next session as well. So this is just a simple program that I'm going to want everyone to code up. It's a program for simply rolling a dice. Let me explain it, because please don't start coding this. So the program is simply like this. When you run it, you're going to get this output. Player 1 rolled a 7, player 2 rolled a 9, player 2, you win. So if you were to write a program to simulate 2 users rolling a pair of dice, okay? So a die has 6 sides. So write a program to simulate a user rolling a pair of dice. So if you rolled a pair of dice, what is the possible range of values that you could get from the dice? Someone, this is an easy question.
2.
So you could get 2. What's the biggest number you can get from those 2 dice? 12. So the range would be from 2 to 12. Thank you. So if you roll 2 dice, both of them could be a 1, or both could be a 6. So the range of values is from 2 to 12. Well, in your program, you should have a main. You should write a program that has a main function. It also has a roll pair dice function. So please go ahead and code up as a comment. Let's make this together. File, new, save, and let's call this roll dice program, or dice program. Dice program. Okay. So your output, I'm just going to put way down here, sample output, and type this up. What should the sample output be? Player 1 rolled a 7 and player 2 rolled a 9. Okay, so player 1 rolled a 7 and player 2 rolled a 9. Player 2, you win. Okay, or player 1, you win, or it's a tie. So I'd like you to write 2 functions, a main function that's going to control the working of the program. It's going to control calling this roll pair dice function. And you know what? Let me hit stop because we're out of time. And let me hit stop, and I'll end the session, and just hit join on that same exact link that's already there.